We should talk a little bit about buyers who don't fully take over businesses and why it's problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do like share a story about all this. So let's tie all this process together and give us an example or a war story of a client that went through this, and hopefully it's a success story. But we learn just as much from failure, so we'll take either.
So I'm going to give you at least 3 failures, and they are the only failures I've ever had where we get to a point where we're talking about potential lawsuits, which is really interesting. But what's happened, and this is not a single story because there's 3 of them over probably 10 years of doing these kinds of deals. 3, that's not really a lot.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it's
congratulations.
Crazy. But these are crazy stories when you hear them. These are situations, and they were almost all identical, and in each case, a different kind of buyer. But these were buyers who bought a business they didn't really understand. And what happened is, in one case, it was a private equity firm. In another case, it was a strategic buyer who thought they knew all about Amazon because they were on Vendor Central. And they were distributing through Vendor Central, which we know is very different than Seller Central. And then I had another one who it was an individual, and it really wasn't that much of an Amazon business. It was it had both Amazon as well as other platforms. But in each case, the buyer failed to take charge of the business. So I'll give you some examples. In one case, they went in and got some training and spent lots of time with the seller on training, but kept asking the seller to continue to run the business. When it got to be about 90 days into it, the seller had felt that this transition services agreement was over and that the buyer should be taking over. And they sent the buyer a note and said, hey, look, you still got everything coming to our warehouse. You haven't changed your address. You haven't taken over the phones. You haven't done any of those things. What are you going to do? When are you going to take over? And in that case, the buyer came back and said, no, I want you to just keep running the business for me. Needless to say, my seller went crazy. He said, well, wait a minute. You owe me a bunch of money, but I didn't sell the business so that I could run it for you and you would get the upside. That's not the deal. If I'm going to run it and I'm going to make all the decisions, I want the upside. This is crazy. So they are in a serious dispute. The second time I saw something like this happen, the buyer was a private equity firm, and they were convinced that this is easy stuff. Let's face it. If an entrepreneur can do this out of a bedroom, then a private equity firm with a series of Ivy League MBAs can certainly run this business. Well, what people fail to understand is this is 24/7, 52 weeks a year, even Christmas Day. I mean, you've got to be on this business, and you have to have a plan for it.
You don't get to clock out at 5 p.m. and drive home and spend time coaching basketball and football.
Well, the funny part about it is you might be able to do that, but you have to have a plan when you are clocked out for what you're going to do to get clocked back in when you're done with that coaching experience. Yeah. It's just like my practice. I mean, I get clients all the time that say to me, wow, you're answering at night. I'm like, you're working at night. What am I going to do? I mean, I can't, in the event of an emergency, we got to respond. And it was a scenario where they never understood how the business worked. And this happened with a second client as well, and it was the strategic buyer using Vendor Central. Again, didn't really understand how the business works. So they had a great 9-to-5 staff. 5 o'clock comes, their staff goes home. These people don't act like owners of a business. They're not entrepreneurial. They're not creative. They're looking for a handbook that's going to tell them what to do when a customer wants to return product. They're waiting for what to do. Where's the handbook when Amazon gives you a seller performance notice and you need an improvement plan? And they're looking for, how do we do that? Well, as we know, every improvement plan is different because every seller performance notice is vague, arbitrary, and not exactly clear about what went wrong. So you're trying again to thread a needle, but you have no idea where the needle is. So it's kind of crazy. But those are the kinds of stories that we see where they're coming after indemnification. Most of these deals, we don't see that. And I just emphasize over and over again, just make sure you do great transition services. Make sure the buyer knows they got to take over the company and are prepared And if you're a seller, don't sell to a buyer who isn't prepared to do that. And if you are a buyer, don't buy if you're not prepared to work. If you have a different job during the day, don't buy this company. You won't be ready to take it over.
Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications about new videos and interviews. And introduce yourself in the comments. Are you a buyer or a seller?